Okay, so I am officially back making content again. I took a hiatus with getting married and having a honeymoon and all that stuff, but I am back, and one of the stories that broke while I was gone was the Brock Purdy contract. So I figured I'd make a video and kind of break that down, talk about everything that happened. So it's a 5-year, $265 million deal. $181 million of it is guaranteed. So it's an average salary of $53 million for the next 5 years, starting after this next one. He's still only going to be making about his cap is going to be about $5 million in 2025, and then it will go up to a lot higher for the next 5 seasons. And so before we even really get into is Brock Purdy himself worth this amount of money, I think first let's talk about quarterback contracts in general, because there has been a big push to kind of bring up the fact that a lot of times paying a good quarterback, great quarterback money doesn't work out. And it's a little bit confusing as to why that is, because you would think, hey, it's still good to have a good quarterback, right? But it actually kind of makes sense once you break it down. So let's take Patrick Mahomes, for example. He makes about $45 million every year, a deal that looks better and better every single day, when that was a deal that broke the market when it first happened. But with his contract, he usually generates, a top quarterback tends to generate around 4 wins per season. He is obviously a top quarterback. And if you look at the average amount of money teams usually spend for a win, for Patrick Mahomes, he's essentially generating $133 million worth of value, despite the fact that he's only getting paid $45 million. It's essentially the best contract you're going to get, right? But for other teams, they're going to sit here and say, okay, great. If I can trade for Patrick Mahomes, I would. That's not really an option the 49ers have, right? They have Brock Purdy. They can't make that work. So what do you do in that situation? Well, essentially, the second best quarterback contract you can have is a good quarterback who is making no money, who is on their rookie deal, similar to how the 49ers nearly won a Super Bowl and, made it to multiple conference championships with Brock Purdy as the quarterback, because, the year they almost won the Super Bowl, he was the quarterback who's making the most, or he was the quarterback on the roster and wasn't making much money. There's just a huge value in that as well. Now, the third best contract that you can have is a contract like this, getting still a good quarterback, paying them great quarterback money. That still is usually pretty good. Like, that helps you get to the playoffs, but usually it's just hard to compete with the other teams that, the teams that have quarterbacks who are making either little money or quarterbacks who have just the elite level quarterback. Usually it kind of can get you to playoffs, but probably is going to have you stop short of going on a long run. An example of this is the Philadelphia Eagles. Just last year, Jalen Hurts was only making $14 million on his cap hit. So because of that, they were able to use those extra resources to build a great team around him. Hurts against Mahomes, Hurts actually outplayed Mahomes in the Super Bowl, but they weren't banking on that going into the game, and they didn't need to because they had other talent around Hurts that Mahomes just didn't have. You're getting the advantage that way. Whereas if now for this situation, Brock Purdy and Mahomes are essentially getting around the same amount of money, Purdy's getting a little bit more, how do you compete with Mahomes, or how do you compete with a team that beat Mahomes? There are multiple ways you can, right? The one way is you could just build the talent around Purdy, even with the having less money situation. You can make it work, right? You can draft very well. I think the Detroit Lions have probably been the best example of this school of thought of let's just draft a lot of really good players in other positions, and sure, we're not saving $50 million with our quarterback contract, but they're saving $30 million with their edge rusher contract, with Aiden Hutchinson being an elite level player who's still on his rookie deal, right? Make some moves like that, you can still make up the difference that way. Of course, they didn't win a Super Bowl, but they also got really injured. So I think that's an example of, something you can try and chase. The other example is, if you remember, this might sound surprising, but when the Ravens signed Lamar Jackson, there was some talk of, but is he a top 5 quarterback? Like, he's a good quarterback. He won an MVP, but then he had kind of a couple down years and kept getting hurt towards the end of the year. So there was some talk about, was that a great move? And then it turned out to be a great move, right? He was able to be the elite level player. That was a contract most people were in favor of, but still, there was some doubt. I'm bringing that up because, hey, Brock Purdy's a young player, right? He's going to be 26 this next season. Usually you kind of hit your peak around 27, but sometimes it's a little bit later than that. Sometimes players are late bloomers. So he has room to improve and get better, and maybe he is going to be a top 5 level quarterback someday. I mean, this guy has gotten MVP votes, right? This isn't like, it wouldn't be a crazy situation for him to continue to improve, and maybe he can. Again, is he going to be Mahomes? I'm not expecting it. Can he play in a game where he can compete with Mahomes? Sure, and even in their Super Bowl, I didn't think there was a massive gap between Purdy and Mahomes in that game. Mahomes was just a little bit better down the stretch, but also Purdy was a little bit better early on too. So, although I think Purdy had a lot better of a situation than Mahomes did in that Super Bowl with, the edge rushers constantly crushing Mahomes in that game as well. But that's a whole other conversation. I do think these conversations always, for whatever reason, it seems like the most common argument is, in my opinion, by far and away the worst argument, which is, well, look at all these other quarterbacks who have worse deals. Dak Prescott's making $60 million, so we're better than that, right? So, hey, again, the goal is not to be better than the worst quarterback contract, right? The goal is to essentially have the best quarterback contract or one of the best quarterback contracts, because a team full of decent contracts makes you a decent football team. If you're trying to be a great team, you have to have some great contracts, right? Yes, it is true. There are worse contracts. And I think part of why people bring this point up is because it sometimes gets tied into, is Purdy himself worth this deal? In my opinion, Purdy is very much worth his deal if other guys who get these kind of deals are also worth that deal. Purdy is in that tier of quarterback play. I think the question is just, is it smart to pay a guy who is in that tier of quarterback play what they tend to get? If Purdy hit the open market, he probably would have made more than $53 million. Another important thing to note, though, with these is, I keep saying $53 million a year, but that's not exactly how these things work, right? I brought up Hurts as an example earlier. He gets this huge deal that they technically win a Super Bowl during because it's a backloaded deal, and they win it in the first year of that deal where he's not getting paid a ton, right? You can do things that way. So you can, and again, the cap keeps going up, that by the last year of the deal, a lot of times these deals end up being still not as good as a Mahomes contract, but maybe closer to the ballpark of a good rookie deal contract of, like Jared Goff, these past couple years was sort of the end of his, his Rams deal, actually. And so he's not getting paid. It's something that was a ton at the time, but just because the cap keeps going up is actually not as much now, right? That kind of thing happens. I'm not going to lie. I think there will be some years where I'm just going to kind of write off the 49ers a little bit because of his contract. Maybe not write off. That's the wrong word. Because like I said, it's still possible to make something work, but I would bet against them, I guess, if there are years where Purdy's making $60 million a year due to the contract, fluctuation. Those years, I think they're going to have a really tough chance to get over the hump. Doesn't mean they can't be good, doesn't mean they can't make the playoffs, but be great. That feels like I would probably bet against them in those years. But what I also find interesting about all of this is, like, if you're a 49ers fan, you're thrilled about this, right? Because he's a fun quarterback that you like watching. And I'm a Tampa Bay fan, and I'm thankful that Baker Mayfield signed a pretty reasonable deal. But if he signed a $50 million deal, even though I put him kind of in the same tier as Brock Purdy, I'd probably be happy about it because, like, he's a fun quarterback for me to watch, right? So if you're a 49ers fan, of course you're happy about the Purdy deal. As a fan, you're going to want to see a good quarterback for your team stay with your team, which is almost why it's impossible not to make this move if you're a 49ers GM, right? If you're John Lynch, if you're Kyle Shanahan, I mean, what are really your options? You signed this deal, and now you're probably going to still be making millions and millions of dollars to work in football at the highest level at their respective positions because their 49ers are probably going to at least be decent during that entire stretch. If you let that player walk, well then, okay, yes, in the long term, it's probably a good idea, but you don't know if you're going to make it work. The Washington football team back in the day let Kirk Cousins walk and decided to trade for Alex Smith. Alex Smith gets a bad injury, and then essentially, they weren't able to get another quarterback. Everyone on that organization gets fired. Eventually, they found Jaden Daniels, and things worked out. You could argue long-term that was the correct football decision to do that, be bad for a bit so you could finally get good. But who cares because you all lost your jobs, right? So for the 49ers, it's almost just a move you have to make. The last thing I'll bring up is I think $53 million, as weird as this sounds, pretty reasonable for Brock Purdy. I do. I think getting an extra fifth year helps the 49ers in this scenario because, like I said, cap keeps going up. And there's been, quarterbacks getting more and more money. I think for him, I'm sure part of his argument was, hey, look at how much Dak Prescott got. Again, those arguments, that's what you're going to make. Well, I don't think those are great arguments. You will make those in the negotiation room, right? But the 49ers were able to still talk it down enough to make it still, a lot of money, but more reasonable than I was expecting when this happened. So there is at least that going for it. So yeah, those are kind of the good, the bad, and everything in between with this contract. Let me know in the comments below. Is there anything I missed out? Anything you think that should be mentioned as well? Always love hearing from you. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.